Shocking Simpsons prediction that happened in real life. They did it again. The Simpsons just made another eerie prediction, and it came true in real life. From celebrity scandals to major world events, The Simpsons has a strange history of predicting the future, and this one will blow your mind. In this video, we break down the shocking Simpsons prediction that actually happened, how it unfolded in real life, and why fans are convinced the writers might just be time travelers. We'll explore the original episode, compare it to the real-world event, and discuss whether it's just coincidence or something more mysterious. If you're a fan of crazy coincidences, pop culture mysteries, and mind-bending predictions, you don't want to miss this one. The Simpsons has shocked us for decades with their eerie ability to predict the future. From political upheavals to world events, their forecasts leave us questioning, is it just coincidence or something more? It began like a scene plucked straight from the pages of a strange, prophetic novel, except it wasn't. It was an animated moment from a decades-old television show. One so absurd, so far-fetched at the time, that viewers laughed, dismissed it, and moved on with their lives. Yet in the quiet, haunting way reality sometimes has of catching up with fiction, it returned, not as a joke, not as satire, but as news so tragic it stopped the world in its tracks. The Simpsons had done it again. And this time, the prediction was about the death of wrestling icon Hulk Hogan. For more than 30 years, The Simpsons has been a cartoon that thrived on exaggeration, satire, and cultural references pulled from the headlines of its day. Yet over and over again, those jokes have somehow transformed into chillingly accurate prophecies of the future. They've predicted presidential elections, technological advances, global crises, and even celebrity scandals with uncanny precision. And in an episode aired nearly 2 decades ago, buried between gags and slapstick humor, there was a scene, brief, almost throwaway, that now feels impossible to ignore. The year was 2006, and Homer was watching a parody wrestling match on TV. In the ring, a larger-than-life, mustachioed wrestler, clearly modeled after Hulk Hogan, collapsing mid-match as the crowd gasped. The announcer's words? "The legend has fallen." At the time, it was nothing more than a visual gag, a sly nod to wrestling theatrics and the over-the-top stunts that had made figures like Hogan a household name. But in August 2025, life mirrored that fiction in a way no fan could have prepared for. Hogan, the real Hulk Hogan, was gone. Not in the ring, not as part of some staged WWE storyline, but in the cold reality of cardiac arrest. And just like the animated crowd in that episode, the real world stood frozen in disbelief. The first whispers came not from an official WWE statement, but from online forums. Screenshots of the old Simpsons episode began circulating on Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit within hours of the news breaking. They called it, one post read, "The Simpsons predicted Hogan's death back in '06. The clip gained millions of views overnight, fueled by eerie side-by-side comparisons of the cartoon scene and real-life footage from Hogan's final public appearance. In both, there was a sense of finality, a curtain call that nobody recognized for what it truly was. To understand why this prediction shook people so deeply, you have to understand who Hulk Hogan was to the world. Born Terry Bollea, Hogan wasn't just a wrestler. He was the embodiment of 1980s pop culture excess, a towering figure in red and yellow who could turn a wrestling promo into a national event. His voice, gravelly yet commanding, became the soundtrack of an entire era of sports entertainment. And beyond the ring, he was an actor, a pitchman, and a larger-than-life personality whose catchphrases were etched into the fabric of pop culture. Losing him wasn't just losing a sports figure, it was losing a piece of American cultural history. That's what made The Simpsons connection so unsettling. Fans weren't just saying, "Wow, that's similar." They were looking at a scene that mirrored reality with an almost photographic accuracy. The fictional Hogan lookalike in the cartoon was wearing gear nearly identical to Hogan's most famous WrestleMania outfit. The camera in the episode cut to a young boy in the crowd clutching a foam finger and crying, eerily similar to a real image taken from a young fan in Tampa who broke down upon hearing the news of Hogan's passing. Even the commentary in the cartoon, "The legend has fallen," was almost word for word what a Fox News anchor said when breaking the story on live television. This wasn't the first time The Simpsons had dipped its toe into wrestling culture. They'd parroted the spectacle of the sport before, even featuring celebrity guest stars from the wrestling world. But this was different. It felt deliberate in hindsight. The way the fictional announcer paused before delivering the line. The slow zoom on the fallen wrestler's motionless body. The quiet, somber reaction shot of the crowd. It was comedy that, somehow, aged into prophecy. As news of Hogan's passing spread, the conversation online split into two camps. The first group, the skeptics, insisted this was nothing more than coincidence, the byproduct of a show that had produced thousands of scenes over 3 decades, inevitably stumbling onto real events now and then. But the second group? They were convinced something deeper was at play. The writers know things, one Reddit user claimed in a thread that quickly gained thousands of upvotes. This isn't just guessing. They have sources. Or they're from the future. The conspiracy theories grew from there. Some pointed to the episode's air date, March 12, 2006, noting that it fell exactly 19 years and 5 months before Hogan's death. They called it the Hogan Code, suggesting the numbers were part of a hidden pattern in the show's other predictions. Others dug into the show's writing staff from that season, highlighting that one of the guest writers had a distant connection to a former WWE producer. Was it an inside joke gone too far? Or a private warning disguised as comedy? Then there were the eerie coincidences surrounding Hogan's last days. Just weeks before his death, Hogan had given an interview where he spoke about slowing down and hinted at wanting to spend more time with family. Fans later pointed out that in the Simpsons episode, the fictional Hogan-like wrestler delivered an almost identical speech during a pre-match promo, talking about how maybe it's time to hang up the boots. In real life, Hogan's comments had been seen as typical retirement talk, but after the episode resurfaced, the parallels felt inescapable. Inside WWE, sources reportedly began trading the Simpsons clip like a secret handshake. One anonymous staffer claimed that even Vince McMahon, no stranger to the theatrics of myth-making, admitted backstage that the prediction was uncanny. Another insider said that several wrestlers had gathered in a locker room after a SmackDown taping just to watch the episode in full, their laughter fading to silence as the climactic collapse scene played out. Meanwhile, fans outside the wrestling bubble began treating the Simpsons connection as a kind of digital shrine. TikTok edits paired Hogan's final interviews with the animated scene, layering somber piano music over the cartoon footage. YouTube channels specializing in Simpsons predictions put the Hogan moment alongside the show's forecasts of the Trump presidency, the Disney-Fox merger, and even the COVID-19 pandemic. The implication was clear. If The Simpsons could foresee all of those, why not this? The emotional weight of Hogan's death was heavy enough on its own. But when paired with the strange, almost supernatural timing of the Simpsons episode, it took on a kind of pop culture mythology. It wasn't just that a legend had died, it was that, in some strange way, we'd already seen it happen, and we hadn't realized until it was too late. That mix of grief and eerie familiarity created a collective déjà vu, leaving fans questioning the boundaries between fiction and reality. By the time Hogan's private funeral took place in Clearwater, Florida, the Simpsons prediction had become part of the narrative. Mourners at the gates spoke to reporters about how they'd rewatched the episode in disbelief. One fan, tears streaming down his face, clutched an old Hulkamania shirt and said, "It's like they knew. Like they were trying to tell us something all along." Inside, among the friends, family, and fellow wrestlers gathered to say goodbye, there was talk of how strange it was that a cartoon had captured something so human, so final. The writers of The Simpsons have long maintained that their so-called predictions are just the result of sharp satire, cultural awareness, and the occasional lucky guess. And yet, in moments like this, those explanations feel inadequate. Maybe it is just coincidence. Or maybe, as some fans half-jokingly suggest, Matt Groening really does have a time machine tucked away somewhere in the Fox lot. Whatever the truth, The Hulk Hogan prediction now stands as one of the show's most haunting, not because it was flashy or specific, but because it was quiet, almost hidden, waiting for reality to catch up. The tragedy of Hogan's passing will be remembered for many reasons: the loss of a larger-than-life icon, the outpouring of love from fans around the world, the tributes that flooded in from every corner of the entertainment industry. But for a certain generation of viewers, it will also be remembered for that one scene in a 2006 Simpsons episode, a reminder that sometimes fiction has a way of peering just a little too far into the future. And when it does, the line between a joke and a prophecy can disappear in the blink of an eye. The Simpsons scene, for those who haven't rewatched it since the story broke, lasts just under 45 seconds. And yet, within those fleeting moments lies a blueprint of real events that would only come to pass nearly 2 decades later. It begins with a wide shot of the wrestling arena, not unlike the classic venues where Hulk Hogan himself built his empire. The crowd is bathed in a warm golden hue, animated banners rippling across the background, reading slogans like "Legend Forever" and "Never Tap Out." It's a satirical exaggeration of wrestling fan culture, but the warmth in the palate feels almost reverent. At center stage, the wrestler, unnamed in the show but clearly modeled after Hogan, steps into the ring, his gait slow, his shoulders carrying both muscle and age. The animators gave him that unmistakable handlebar mustache, the blonde hair peeking from under a bandana, and a body language that radiates familiarity. Then, without warning, the wrestler clutches his chest mid-match. His face contorts, the crowd gasps, and the commentary team falls silent. The sound design here is eerie. The background noise drops, replaced by a faint echo of the audience murmuring, unsure if what they're seeing is part of the show or something far more serious. Then comes the announcer's chilling line: "The legend has fallen." When side-by-side comparisons began circulating online, the similarities to Hogan's final days were uncanny. In his last public appearance, a charity gala in Tampa, Hogan had walked to the stage to roaring applause, but those close to him later recalled that he seemed slower, almost tired. He gave a speech about resilience, about having fought through battles in life that were tougher than any in the ring, a line that now feels like a farewell masked as inspiration. In the Simpsons scene, the fictional Hogan says something strikingly similar in the pre-match promo: "I've fought giants, I've fought time, but tonight, I'm just here to give the people one last show." When Hogan passed away weeks later from cardiac arrest, those echoes became impossible to ignore. What was once a throwaway gag became an ominous foreshadowing, immortalized in yellow ink years before it played out in reality. The timeline of how this prediction leapt from niche fan circles into the mainstream is almost as fascinating as the moment itself. Within hours of Hogan's death being confirmed, Twitter's trending tab was dominated not just by hashtag RIP Hogan, but also by hashtag Simpsons predicted it. On Reddit's r/conspiracy and r/squared circle, long threads appeared, meticulously breaking down the episode's context, air date, and potential inspirations. Someone even uploaded a high-definition rip of the scene to YouTube with the title, "The Simpsons Predict Hulk Hogan's Death, 2006 vs. 2025. The video exploded, racking up millions of views in less than 2 days. Reaction channels picked it up, and soon morning talk shows like Good Morning America and Today were running segments on The Simpsons' creepiest predictions, with Hogan's death taking the spotlight. A Fox News anchor even remarked live on air, "It's like they had a crystal ball." The phrase instantly became a meme. But perhaps the most surreal development came when TMZ released a leaked text exchange between 2 WWE Hall of Famers reacting to the prediction. In the messages, one wrestler allegedly sent the other a link to the Simpsons clip with the caption, "Brother, they knew before we did." The reply? "Man, that's spooky." Makes you wonder. As the story snowballed, so did the theories. Some pointed to the fact that The Simpsons has a long track record of referencing wrestling, from Bret Hart guest starring in the 90s to Homer stepping into the ring as the masked Springfield Mauler. Could the writers have simply taken inspiration from Hogan's then aging career and crafted a gag about his eventual retirement, only for fate to twist it into a tragic reality? Others weren't so sure. There's an entire subculture of Simpsons prediction trackers, people who comb through old episodes frame by frame, cataloging moments that could, in some twisted way, come true. For them, Hogan's death wasn't just another coincidence. It was a confirmation that the show had tapped into something unexplainable. The parallels were too specific, the timing too precise, and then there were the eerie details from Hogan's actual final hours. According to close friends, Hogan had spent the evening before his passing watching old wrestling tapes, something he hadn't done in years. He reportedly mentioned, almost offhandedly, that he'd like to be remembered for his spirit rather than his strength. Fans later noticed that in the Simpsons episode, right before the fictional Hogan collapses, he tells the crowd, "When the muscles fade, it's the heart that matters." When news outlets picked up on that parallel, the story shifted from being a quirky internet phenomenon to a kind of pop culture folklore. It wasn't just about Hogan anymore. It was about the strange ways in which art and life seem to intertwine, the eerie overlaps that make us question whether we're living in a script we didn't write. In Clearwater, Florida, where Hogan's private funeral was held, the Simpsons connection was the quiet undercurrent in conversations among fans gathered outside the gates. Some held up signs with Hogan's famous catchphrases, others carried homemade posters showing the cartoon wrestler and the real Hogan side by side, with the words, "Forever a Legend," in bold. One fan, visibly shaken, told a reporter, "It's like the universe gave us a spoiler, and we still didn't see it coming." Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of grief and reflection. Fellow wrestlers, old rivals, and close friends spoke about Hogan's unmatched charisma, his impact on the industry, and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. But even in those eulogies, there were subtle nods to the prediction. One veteran performer reportedly began his speech by saying, "They say life imitates art. Sometimes, it imitates a cartoon." The room fell silent, a moment of bittersweet acknowledgement that, somehow, a 2006 joke had become part of Hogan's real-life story. Meanwhile, the Simpsons' official social media accounts remained silent on the matter, as they often do when one of their predictions goes viral. But fans noticed that on the day after Hogan's funeral, the show's official Twitter banner quietly changed. It now featured an image from that same 2006 episode, the fictional Hogan-like wrestler standing tall in the ring, moments before the collapse. No caption. No explanation. Just an image that, for those who knew, said everything. As the weeks passed, the frenzy around the prediction faded from headlines but lingered in the cultural memory. For wrestling fans, it became one more thread in the tapestry of Hogan's mythos. The idea that his life was so larger than life, so deeply ingrained in pop culture, that even The Simpsons had felt compelled to write him into their world. For Simpsons fans, it became another eerie checkmark on a list of predictions that seems to grow longer each year. And for everyone else, it was a moment of collective unease, a reminder that sometimes the distance between parody and prophecy is far smaller than we think. Whether it was a lucky guess, a sharp-eyed satirical jab, or something stranger, one truth remains. The Simpsons didn't just predict an event. They captured the essence of a man, the emotional gravity of a moment, long before it happened. And in doing so, they left us with a story that's equal parts tribute, tragedy, and mystery. In the weeks after Hulk Hogan's death and the viral resurfacing of the Simpsons clip, the conversation shifted from shock to obsession. Fans weren't just sharing the side-by-side comparisons anymore. They were dissecting the cultural meaning behind it. For some, it was a harmless piece of eerie trivia, the kind of coincidence you bring up at dinner parties. For others, it was proof that the Simpsons writers had tapped into something unnatural. This wasn't new territory. The show's uncanny track record, from predicting Donald Trump's presidency to foreseeing the Disney-Fox merger years in advance, had spawned a cottage industry of YouTube channels, Reddit threads, and TikTok creators devoted to cataloging every so-called prediction. But the Hogan case was different. It wasn't about politics, economics, or technology. It was about a living, breathing person, a man whose life and death had been part of the public consciousness for decades. The debate fell into two camps. On one side were the rationalists, armed with statistics and probability theory. They argued that with over 700 episodes, thousands of jokes, and hundreds of cultural references, The Simpsons had simply covered so much ground that some of their gags were bound to resemble future events. To them, the Hogan episode was nothing more than satire aging into coincidence. One viral Twitter thread put it bluntly, "If you throw enough darts in the dark, eventually you'll hit a bullseye." On the other side were the believers, not necessarily in time travel, but in the idea that The Simpsons writers had access to insider knowledge and a knack for weaving it into storylines. These fans pointed to Hogan's health issues over the years, his surgeries, his public struggles with mobility, as potential indicators that someone in the know could have suggested the collapse gag. You think a show that gets celebrity cameos from presidents and A-list actors doesn't have wrestling insiders feeding them info? One Reddit comment read. Please. The Hogan prediction also breathed new life into one of the stranger fan theories, that The Simpsons operates not just as a satirical mirror to reality, but as a kind of cultural testing ground, planting ideas in the public consciousness long before they manifest. The theory posits that by normalizing certain scenarios in a cartoon, the show subtly prepares audiences to accept them when they happen in real life. It's the kind of speculation that sounds like late-night dorm room talk, until you're watching a yellow-skinned caricature of Hulk Hogan collapse in 2006, then see eerily similar footage in 2025. And yet, even the skeptics had to admit the Hogan case had elements that were hard to explain away. The specific details, the wrestler's resemblance to Hogan, the outfit matching one of his real WrestleMania looks, the near-identical pre-match speech, went beyond vague similarity. These weren't generic wrestler tropes, they were Hogan-specific. The media, sensing the perfect blend of tragedy and pop culture curiosity, leaned into the story. Rolling Stone ran a feature titled "The Simpsons Called It Again: Why Hulk Hogan's Death Hits Different." In it, media analysts argued that part of the reason this prediction resonated so strongly was because Hogan himself was such a cartoonish figure in real life. Hulk Hogan was larger than life, one cultural critic wrote. His persona was as exaggerated as any animated character. The line between fiction and reality was always blurry with him. That's why seeing him in The Simpsons, and then seeing life imitate that art feels so surreal. Meanwhile, wrestling fans took the theory in a more personal direction. Forums lit up with threads reminiscing about Hogan's career, his iconic rivalries, and his crossover appeal into movies and TV. Many admitted that The Simpsons connection had led them to revisit old matches, promos, and interviews, almost as if looking for hidden signs. Moments where Hogan might have unknowingly foreshadowed his own fate. Some even began drawing parallels between Hogan's real-life career arc and the fictional wrestler's story in The Simpsons episode. In that animated subplot, the wrestler had been reluctant to retire, pulled back into the ring for one last match by promoters promising a final payday and fanfare. Hogan, in the last years of his public life, had made sporadic appearances at wrestling events, conventions, and fan expos. Each time, the crowd erupted, chanting his name, just as the animated crowd had done in 2006. What unsettled people most wasn't just that The Simpsons showed Hogan's collapse, it was the emotional tone of the scene. Unlike the show's usual slapstick, there was a weight to it. The background crowd went quiet. The camera lingered on the fallen figure. And when the announcer declared, "The legend has fallen," it wasn't delivered with irony, it was solemn. That gravitas, rare for The Simpsons, made it feel more like an actual memorial than a joke. This tonal shift led to another wave of speculation. Could the writers themselves have sensed they were touching on something heavier than usual? One former Simpsons animator, speaking anonymously to a podcast, admitted that sometimes scenes came together in ways they didn't fully understand until later. "You write the joke, you draw the scene, and you move on," he said. But years later, when reality lines up with it, it's creepy. Like, we were part of something we didn't sign up for. Hogan's death also became a case study for the parasocial relationship between celebrities and audiences. For decades, fans had seen him as invincible, the man who told you to say your prayers, take your vitamins, and never back down. The Simpsons' prediction shattered that illusion in retrospect, making fans confront the mortality of someone they'd mythologized. It was almost as if the cartoon had been trying to warn them. Even legends fall. In Clearwater, the weeks after the funeral saw a strange kind of pilgrimage. Fans visited not just Hogan's resting place, but also comic book stores, memorabilia shops, and sports bars where the Simpsons clip played on loop. At one bar, someone had created a custom Hulk Hogan action figure, yellow skin, exaggerated cartoon proportions, posed mid-collapse on a miniature wrestling ring. Above it, a hand-painted sign read, "The Simpsons called it." The writer's room at The Simpsons, of course, stayed officially silent. That silence only fueled more theories. Some believed the show deliberately avoids addressing predictions because acknowledging them would break the mystique. Others thought it was a quiet act of respect, particularly in cases like Hogan's where the subject was a real person with grieving loved ones, and yet the show seemed to wink at the audience in subtle ways. In the season premiere later that year, a background gag in a scene set at Moe's Tavern showed a newspaper headline pinned to the wall. The headline read, "Cartoon wrestling star remembered fondly, nation mourns." No direct reference to Hogan, but the font, colors, and layout were eerily similar to a real-life Sports Illustrated cover published after his death. For fans, it was the perfect ending to this strange chapter, not a confirmation, not a denial, but a quiet nod from the very people who had started the conversation nearly 20 years earlier. Even now, months later, the Hogan prediction remains one of the most discussed entries in The Simpsons prophecy list. Whether you believe it was coincidence, insider knowledge, or something unexplainable, the fact remains, a joke meant to satirize the spectacle of wrestling ended up becoming part of wrestling history itself, and perhaps that's the most haunting part. Because if The Simpsons could so accurately capture the end of Hulk Hogan's story, what else have they already drawn that we just haven't lived through yet? By the time the frenzy over The Simpsons prediction began to fade from the 24-hour news cycle, one truth had already taken root in the public consciousness. This wasn't just a coincidence to be filed away with the others. For many, it felt personal. Hulk Hogan wasn't an abstract politician, an unknown scientist, or a faceless concept like a corporate merger. He was the wrestler, the face of an entire era of sports entertainment. His story had been a constant in the lives of millions. From the 1980s boom where his name was synonymous with wrestling itself, to the Hollywood crossovers, to the scandals, to the unexpected moments of redemption. For better or worse, he was always there, the red and yellow-clad warrior who seemed immune to time. That's why, when people rewatched the Simpsons scene, they didn't just see a cartoon gag. They saw the curtain call for a real-life hero, played out years before the final act. They saw an image that now felt loaded with grief, nostalgia, and that uncomfortable awareness that even the mightiest eventually fall. And yet, beneath the sadness, there was something else, an odd sense of intimacy. It's one thing for the media to break the news of a celebrity's passing. It's another for a cartoon from decades earlier to almost preemptively tell you, this day will come. It gave the tragedy an uncanny déjà vu, a feeling like we had already mourned him once before, only to live through it again. That's the quiet, often unspoken power of the Simpsons' so-called predictions. They don't just line up with events, they plant seeds. They take fictionalized versions of real people and, intentionally or not, sketch scenarios that later feel chillingly familiar. And when those moments arrive in reality, the audience doesn't start from zero. They start with the memory of the cartoon, the echo of a scene they didn't realize had embedded itself in their minds. The result is something almost ceremonial. Hogan's actual funeral in Clearwater, Florida, was intimate, closed to the public. But his first funeral, the animated one, had already taken place in millions of living rooms back in 2006. We didn't recognize it then for what it was. Now, it feels like a pre-written eulogy. Even Hogan's closest friends struggled to reconcile the surreal overlap. In one post-funeral interview, a fellow wrestling legend admitted, "It's the damnedest thing. I saw that episode years ago and laughed. Now, it feels like I'm watching a memory I shouldn't have." Another said, "Maybe they didn't predict it. Maybe they just understood him." The show captured something real about him, about the way his story would end. This is what makes the Hogan prediction stand apart from the rest. Trump's presidency, autocorrect, smartwatches. Those predictions are about trends, technology, or political inevitabilities. Hogan's was about a man. A man with flaws, triumphs, and a cultural impact so massive it seeped into the fictional world, only to boomerang back into reality. The Simpsons themselves never acknowledged the prediction directly. But in that silence, there's a certain poetry. To break it down, explain it away, or claim credit would rob it of the very thing that makes it so haunting. Instead, the writers let it live on in the whispers, in the freeze frames, in the late-night conversations between fans who pull up the clip just one more time. And perhaps that's the final, uncomfortable question this story leaves us with. Is life imitating art, or is art quietly steering life? For some, the answer is simple. It's all coincidence. The human brain is wired to find patterns, to connect dots whether they're meant to be connected or not. A joke about an aging wrestler collapsing in the ring could apply to dozens of real-world athletes over the years. Hogan's death just happened to be the one that hit the cultural nerve, but for others, the answer isn't so easy. They look at the uncanny visual details, the eerily matched dialogue, and the emotional weight of the scene, and they wonder if there's something more. Not supernatural, necessarily, but something deeply human. A kind of cultural intuition. A recognition that certain stories, certain endings, are woven into the arcs of public figures long before they play out, and if that's true, maybe the Simpsons writers didn't predict Hogan's death so much as read it. The way a storyteller senses the final chapter of a character they've been following for years. Maybe they simply saw where his narrative was going and, without knowing why, put it to paper. Hogan's passing will be remembered in wrestling history for the tributes, the chants, the tears, and the way his name lit up arenas one last time. But it will also be remembered in pop culture for this strange footnote: the moment a cartoon blurred the line between entertainment and prophecy. Decades from now, when fans talk about the Simpsons' greatest predictions, they will list the usual suspects. But they'll linger on this one. Because it's not just a piece of trivia. It's a reminder of how deeply stories can entangle with the lives they depict. The final shot in that 2006 episode, the fictional Hogan lying still as the crowd's cheers fade into silence, now feels like a closing image for the man himself. The screen fades to black. The credits roll. And somewhere, whether in memory or in the looping archives of television history, the legend stands forever frozen in the moment before the fall, reminding us that sometimes the strangest truths come dressed as jokes. And as the fans say their last goodbyes, one line from the episode lingers like a ghost: the legend has fallen. In the months after Hulk Hogan's passing, the echoes of the Simpsons' prediction didn't fade quietly into the background. If anything, they became part of the man's posthumous legend, woven into tribute videos, fan art, and documentaries in ways no one could have predicted while he was alive. In Los Angeles, a pop culture museum hosted an exhibition titled "Art Imitates Life: The Simpsons' Strangest Predictions." At the center of the exhibit, right between a framed storyboard of the Trump presidency episode and a display case featuring a replica of Lisa's smartwatch from 1995, was a looping screen playing the Hogan collapse scene. Visitors stood in hushed circles, watching the animation on repeat. On the wall beside it was a blown-up quote from Hogan himself, taken from a 2018 interview: "If I go down, brother, I hope it's with the fans cheering." The eeriness of that juxtaposition wasn't lost on anyone. It was as if the exhibit had turned into a shrine, not just to a piece of animation, but to the life it had somehow intersected with. Fans lingered there longer than any other section, as if staring at the pixels might yield an answer to the question that still hung in the air: how could a joke be this accurate? The wrestling world, too, continued to wrestle, no pun intended, with the strangeness of it all. WWE's own network quietly added the Simpsons episode to its Recommended for You section, a subtle nod that hardcore fans noticed instantly. At first, people thought it was a glitch or an algorithm quirk. But then a WWE social media manager liked, and quickly unliked, a fan tweet that read, Even Vince knows The Simpsons called it. That single like was enough to reignite online discussion, and then came the anniversary. 1 year to the day after Hogan's death, a global hashtag trended. Hashtag the legend has fallen. The posts were split, some sharing classic Hogan matches, others sharing the cartoon clip, and still others blending the two in side-by-side edits that blurred where the animation ended and real life began. In one particularly haunting fan video, the fictional Hogan from The Simpsons collapsed, only for the scene to fade into slow-motion footage of Hogan's final WrestleMania entrance, the crowd roaring. The caption read, "Both times we cheered. Both times it was the last." The conversation began to take on an almost spiritual tone. For some fans, the Simpsons clip became a kind of memento mori, a reminder that even those who seem larger than life are bound by the same fragility as the rest of us. One viral TikTok overlaid the collapse scene with audio from Hogan's Hall of Fame speech, where he told fans, "There'll never be another me, brother, but there'll always be you." The comments were flooded with people admitting they were crying. Meanwhile, the conspiracy theorists were far from done. Digging through Simpsons archives, they began cross-referencing other wrestling-related episodes, searching for clues about which wrestling icon might be next. They claimed to see hints of The Rock in one background gag, subtle nods to Ric Flair in another. Whether or not any of it was real didn't seem to matter. The Hogan prophecy had opened a door, and fans were peering through it, desperate to see what might be coming, but in quieter moments, away from the noise of speculation. The Hogan-Simpsons connection seemed to take on a more tender meaning. At a small wrestling convention in Orlando, a fan brought a vintage Simpsons script from the 2006 episode and asked one of the show's former animators to sign it. According to witnesses, the animator paused for a long time before writing a short message above his signature. "For Hulk, thank you for being larger than life." Even Hogan's family eventually addressed the prediction, though in their own way. In a rare interview, his daughter Brooke spoke about watching the Simpsons clip after his passing. "I laughed at first, because it's a cartoon, right? But then, I couldn't stop watching. I think they captured something real about my dad, not just the image, but the heart. It was weirdly comforting. Like somehow he'd already taken his bow and we just didn't know it." In that, perhaps, lies the real magic of the Simpsons prediction phenomenon. It isn't about supernatural foresight, time machines, or even coincidence. It's about the way stories, no matter their medium, can touch the truth. The way satire, parody, and fiction sometimes cut closer to reality than the sharpest news headline, because in the end, Hogan's passing wasn't defined by a cartoon or a prediction. It was defined by the life he lived and the people he inspired. But the Simpsons clip became a lens through which fans could remember him, process the loss, and, in some strange way, say goodbye twice, and maybe that's the final twist. The scene that once made us laugh now makes us pause. The collapse that was once played for comedy is now an unintentional tribute. The words, "The legend has fallen," have left the realm of fiction and entered the echo chamber of reality, where they will be repeated every time someone stumbles across that clip for years to come. The screen fades to black again. The credits roll. And somewhere, in the golden glow of Springfield's wrestling arena, the animated Hogan stands tall one last time, not in collapse, but in frozen defiance, red and yellow against the backdrop of history. Forever remembered. Forever larger than life. In the years that followed, The Simpsons, Hogan connection became less of a viral oddity and more of a cultural artifact. The kind of story that would resurface every so often, like clockwork, in think pieces and anniversary specials. Each time it returned, it carried with it a mix of disbelief and nostalgia, drawing in not just wrestling fans or cartoon devotees, but anyone fascinated by the eerie overlap of fiction and reality. Television producers, always keen to tap into stories with staying power, began crafting retrospective specials on the phenomenon. Netflix's pop culture prophets dedicated an entire episode to the Hogan prediction, opening with that now famous side-by-side footage, Hogan's real-life final public appearance dissolving seamlessly into the animated collapse. The narrator's voice, solemn but tinged with awe, declared, "Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And sometimes it's exactly the same." That documentary revealed something few had known at the height of the frenzy. During the writing of that 2006 episode, the Simpsons team had debated whether the wrestler character should be modeled loosely on Hogan or be entirely original. One writer, a lifelong wrestling fan, had pushed for the Hogan-like design, arguing it would feel funnier if audiences recognized the parody. No one in the room could have guessed that decision would one day fuel one of the show's most talked about coincidences. This behind-the-scenes detail only deepened the fascination. Fans began to imagine an alternate timeline, one where the character had been generic, the scene forgotten. In that version of events, Hogan's death would have been mourned without the eerie shadow of prophecy. But that's not the timeline we live in. In ours, the animated and the real remain forever linked. The effect wasn't limited to fandoms. College media courses began teaching the Hogan prediction as a case study in narrative foreshadowing versus retroactive interpretation. Professors would play the clip for students, then ask, "Did The Simpsons predict Hogan's death, or are we, as an audience, simply reading meaning into a coincidence because we want to believe there's more?" Even Hogan's fellow wrestlers couldn't quite let it go. In interviews, they'd bring it up unprompted, shaking their heads, smiling sadly. One former WWE champion admitted, "I've been in the business long enough to know that everything has an end. But seeing that clip after he passed, man, it felt like they saw the end before we did." Another, with a darker sense of humor, joked, "I told my kids if The Simpsons ever draws me, I'm retiring the next day." The internet kept the torch burning too. Every year, on the anniversary of Hogan's passing, the clip would flood timelines again, often paired with new edits, remixes, or tributes. One year, a fan edited the scene so that, instead of collapsing, the animated Hogan pointed to the sky and disappeared in a beam of light, while real-life footage of his most triumphant moments played in the background. The video ended with the words, "Legends never truly fall." It went viral instantly, shared by wrestlers and even a few former Simpsons staffers. Through it all, the question remained not just about the prediction itself, but about what it meant. Was it evidence that pop culture can somehow read the future, even unintentionally? Or was it simply a reminder that stories, especially about larger-than-life figures, tend to follow familiar arcs? If you asked Hogan's fans, the answer was almost irrelevant. For them, the clip had become part of the mourning process. A strange, unplanned eulogy that just happened to be delivered 19 years early. In that way, it felt almost comforting. A sign that Hogan's story had been so powerful, so deeply embedded in the culture, that it transcended time in the way only myths and legends do. In a quiet corner of Clearwater, away from the media noise and fan pilgrimages, there's a small plaque outside a sports bar Hogan once frequented. It's simple, just his name, his years of life, and the words, "The legend has fallen, but never faded." On certain nights, when wrestling is on the TVs inside, someone will cue up that Simpsons clip on a phone, and the room will go quiet. Some laugh. Some shake their heads. But all of them watch, and as the scene plays out again, as the animated Hogan takes his slow, deliberate steps toward the ropes, clutching his chest and collapsing under the weight of an unseen force, you can almost hear the crowd in the bar join the crowd in Springfield, holding their breath for a man who, in both worlds, gave them everything he had. Years from now, when the bright lights of WWE arenas have dimmed on a new generation of stars, and the roar of Hogan's era has faded into history books, the story of The Simpsons prediction will still be told, not as a meme, not as a viral trend, but as a piece of folklore. It will live in the way old stories do, passed from one fan to another at conventions, whispered in the back rows of indie wrestling shows, told with a mix of disbelief and reverence. A younger fan might hear it for the first time and think it's exaggerated, another piece of wrestling hyperbole. They say a cartoon killed Hogan before the world even knew it was possible. They'll pull up the clip on a phone, expecting a laugh, and instead feel the same uneasy chill that gripped the world in 2025. Historians of pop culture will likely file it under the golden age of predictions, lumping it with other Simpsons forecasts that cross the line from entertainment into eerie reality. But they'll note something different about the Hogan case. Unlike political or technological predictions, this one was deeply personal. It didn't foreshadow a system, an invention, or a trend. It foreshadowed a human ending. And it did so with a tenderness rare for satire. Decades down the line, the clip might resurface in a Wrestling Hall of Fame montage, not officially, perhaps, but in the hearts and minds of fans. It might be projected at fan gatherings where old matches are screened like classic films, the moment met with a collective, knowing sigh. It will stand not just as a curiosity, but as a chapter in Hogan's story, inseparable from the man himself, and maybe, just maybe, it will outlive even the memory of the episode it came from. People might forget the main plot of that 2006 show, or the jokes that surrounded it. But they'll remember the collapse. They'll remember the stillness. They'll remember the words, "The legend has fallen," echoing through the animated arena. Hogan himself, were he here to see it, might have laughed, that deep, gravelly chuckle that carried through decades of promos. He might have thrown a wink to the camera and said, "Guess the Simpsons know their vitamins and prayers too, brother." And yet, even in jest, he'd understand the weight of it, because here's the thing about legends, they don't truly belong to themselves. Once they've been etched into culture, they become shared property, part of our collective story. Hogan's life was already mythic before the prediction. The Simpsons simply gave that myth a strange, poetic bookend. In Springfield's eternal yellow glow, Hogan never really dies. The scene replays on an infinite loop, every frame exactly as it was in 2006, untouched by time. And maybe that's the strange gift of this prediction. In reality, Hogan's heart stopped beating. But in animation, he exists forever in that moment before the fall, a larger-than-life figure under the lights, with the crowd on its feet, still chanting his name. Somewhere out there, a young fan will watch that loop for the first time, long after the rest of us are gone, and they'll feel it, that uncanny mix of sadness, awe, and respect. They won't know every detail of the man's life, or every twist of his career, but they'll know one thing: a legend once stood here. And even in a cartoon, you could tell he was real, even long after the headlines faded. The shadow of that yellow-skinned prophecy lingered in ways few could have predicted. Every so often, Hogan's name would surge back into trending lists, not because of a new scandal or a rediscovered match, but because someone, somewhere, had stumbled upon the clip for the first time and felt compelled to share it with the world again. It happened in waves. A sports radio host in Chicago would mention it during a slow news day, sparking call-in lines packed with nostalgic fans and skeptics. A YouTuber would make a video ranking The Simpsons' top 10 creepiest predictions, with Hogan's collapse scene sitting high on the list, sandwiched between eerily accurate election outcomes and tech inventions. TikTok creators would remix the footage with dramatic soundtracks, transforming 30 seconds of animation into bite-sized tragedy that spread faster than wildfire. Each time it resurfaced, a new generation of fans joined the conversation. Teenagers who had never seen Hogan wrestle live suddenly found themselves watching hours of his old promos, drawn in by the charisma, the bombast, the unshakable confidence that made him a global icon. They'd watch the cartoon and then the real-life footage of his last appearances, and even without living through his heyday, they'd understand. This was a man whose presence transcended the ring. Some took it further. At fan conventions, booths began popping up selling mashup merchandise, Hogan in Simpsons animation style, frozen mid-match, with "The legend has fallen" in bold lettering beneath. Others embraced a more celebratory twist, swapping the caption for "Legends never die" and drawing him standing tall, victorious, against the backdrop of Springfield's cheering crowd. Even in places far removed from wrestling or animation, the story found strange resonance. In philosophy lectures, professors used it as an example when discussing the idea of narrative inevitability, the way certain archetypes seem destined to reach particular conclusions. In literature classes, it became shorthand for the way art and life can reflect each other in unpredictable, haunting ways. But nowhere was the connection more personal than in Clearwater itself. Every summer, on the anniversary of Hogan's passing, fans would gather at the beach near his old mansion. Some would light candles. Others would bring memorabilia, belts, shirts, posters, laying them out in the sand. Inevitably, someone would project the Simpsons scene onto a white sheet as the sun set, and the crowd would watch together in silence. It was strange, even surreal, a moment of mourning and celebration built around a cartoon clip. Yet for those who came, it felt right. Not everyone agreed on what it meant. Some insisted it was proof of nothing more than the Simpsons' mastery of cultural parody. Others clung to the idea that the show's writers, intentionally or not, had tapped into something far more mysterious, an unseen thread that binds fiction and reality together. But regardless of belief, the reaction was the same, an unshakable sense that the scene and the man were forever entwined. In the years that followed, the phrase, "the legend has fallen," began to take on a life of its own. Sports commentators used it when describing the end of a long championship reign. Journalists dropped it into obituaries for figures far outside the world of wrestling. It appeared in music lyrics, in graffiti tags on brick walls, and in Instagram captions for everything from retirement announcements to heartfelt tributes. And every time someone heard it, a flicker of memory pulled them back to that night in Springfield's fictional arena and to the man whose real-life story mirrored it so perfectly. Perhaps that's the quiet genius of the prediction. It didn't just foresee a moment, it gave us the words to process it. And in doing so, it ensured that Hulk Hogan's legacy would never truly be told without it. Somewhere, in the boundless rerun loop of syndication, Springfield's crowd still roars, still gasps, still falls silent. The animated Hogan still takes those slow, heavy steps toward the ropes, still feels that invisible weight pulling him down. And for every viewer who watches it, whether in 2025 or decades from now, that moment will never just be a joke again. It will be a story. It will be a memory. And it will be a reminder that even in a cartoon, the truth sometimes finds its way through. Got it. I'll continue right from where we ended, taking this into that cinematic montage-style ending, blending Hulk Hogan's real-world legacy with the immortalized Simpsons imagery, so it feels like the audience is watching the credits roll on a documentary they'll never forget. The screen fades to black for just a moment. Then, slowly, the sound of a crowd swells in, not the muffled hum of Springfield's animated arena, but the raw, electric roar of a real WWE stadium. We see him, not the cartoon Hogan this time, but the man himself. Stepping into the ring at WrestleMania 3, bathed in golden light, muscles gleaming under the pyrotechnics. The camera pushes in on his face, the same determined, larger-than-life expression that had defined an era. And then, with a seamless dissolve, that face becomes its animated counterpart, yellow-skinned, mustachioed, standing in the center of Springfield's ring. The montage begins. We cut to Hogan slamming Andre the Giant in 1987. The crowd exploding in disbelief. Dissolve into the Simpsons Hogan delivering a comical, exaggerated leg drop, the move so iconic it was instantly recognizable even in animated parody. Real Hogan raises the championship belt high over his head, sweat pouring, the camera flashing like fireworks. Animated Hogan holds a foam belt, the Springfield crowd holding up Hulk rules signs drawn in crude cartoon lettering. The music underneath is slow at first, a single guitar chord, echoing like a heartbeat, but as the images keep coming, it builds. We see real-life Hogan in the 1990s, entering to Real American, his red and yellow gear brighter than ever. Then, without warning, we cut to the animated collapse scene. The cheer drops out. The music dips into a haunting minor key. We linger for just a beat too long on the motionless animated Hogan. Then, another dissolve, the real Hogan, older now, walking down a ramp in his final WWE appearances. His steps are slower, but the crowd still chants his name. We see him nod to fans, point to the sky, tap his chest. This isn't the brash warrior of the 80s. This is the man behind the legend, letting the fans know he hears them, even now. From there, the montage shifts again. The crowd noise becomes a mix, half real, half animated, layered so perfectly they're indistinguishable. We see him signing autographs for kids. We see the animated Hogan doing the same, handing out foam fingers in Springfield. We see real Hogan posing with Make-A-Wish children, smiling that big, genuine smile. Then the screen splits down the middle, one half real, one half cartoon, both versions of Hogan lifting a young fan onto his shoulders. The music swells to a peak. And over it, we hear a single voice, Hogan's real voice, taken from a Hall of Fame speech. There's no such thing as the end, brother. There's just the next chapter. In that moment, the montage changes again. Instead of ending on the collapse, we see the animated Hogan stand back up. The crowd, both Springfield and real life, roars back to life. He points to the sky, flexes one last time, and the screen fades to gold. Across that golden screen, white text appears in silence. The legend has fallen, but will never fade. The credits begin to roll. And even though the documentary is over, the image of Hogan, both real and animated, lingers in the mind, refusing to let go. Because somehow, against all odds, a cartoon clip and a real man's life had merged into a single story. And that story will keep being told. Long after the last bell has rung, the golden screen fades, and for a moment there is only darkness. Then a flicker. Grainy VHS static fills the frame, the kind that instantly transports you back to the 1980s, when wrestling was larger than life and every entrance felt like a once-in-a-lifetime event. Through the static, we see it. Old home video footage of a fan convention from decades ago. Hogan sits at a folding table, signing autographs, laughing with a line of fans that wraps around the block. The camera zooms shakily on his face as he leans in toward the fan holding the camcorder. "You know something, brother? I'm gonna be around forever." It's playful, the way he says it. But as the tape keeps rolling, we see him pause, grin, and add, "Even if I'm just a cartoon someday." The image freezes on that smile. And in the silence that follows, we realize it's not just a throwaway line anymore. It's a prophecy of its own, spoken by the man himself. From there, the footage dissolves into a split screen. On the left, the real Hulk Hogan, towering in the ring during one of his greatest victories. On the right, the animated Hogan, forever preserved in Springfield's arena. Two versions of the same legend, standing shoulder to shoulder across the boundary of reality and fiction. The crowd sound returns, but it's not from the 80s, or from Springfield. It's a modern crowd, raw and real, chanting a single word in unison, Hogan. 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 It's unclear if the chant is for the man, the myth, the cartoon, or all three. But maybe that's the point. By now, they're all the same. As the chants echo, the split screen fades into a single image. Hogan's iconic bandana, laid gently across the top rope of a wrestling ring. The lights dim. The camera pulls back, and as the arena slips into darkness, a single spotlight catches that bandana, and beneath it, in small but unshakable letters, the words that have followed this story from the beginning. The legend has fallen. 1 heartbeat later, a second line fades in beneath it, but Springfield never forgets. The screen brightens again, not with the roar of a crowd, but with the quiet hum of an interview set. A single chair. A glass of water on a side table. The faint outline of framed Simpsons art in the background. The lower third of the screen appears. Former Simpsons staff writer. 2006 season. He's older now, gray creeping into his hair, but his eyes light up as he talks about that era. "You have to understand, we weren't thinking about predicting anything. We were just trying to make each other laugh in the writer's room." The interviewer asks about the Hogan-like wrestler in that 2006 episode, the one that became the centerpiece of the prophecy. He smiles, shakes his head slowly. "We wanted someone larger than life. The obvious choice was a parody of Hogan. I grew up watching him. He was this unstoppable force, but by 2006, he was older, you know? We thought, what if we show him refusing to quit, even when he's clearly worn down?" That was the joke. Or at least, it was supposed to be. A cutaway shows an original storyboard sketch. The animated Hogan, chest puffed out, smiling before the collapse. Beneath it, handwritten notes. Keep it bittersweet. Audience reaction should be mixed, cheer, and concern. The writer leans back, looking almost uneasy now. I didn't think about it for years. Then, after he passed, someone sent me the clip side by side with his final match footage. I couldn't watch it all the way through. We cut to another interview, this time, a former Simpsons animator. She sits in a cluttered studio surrounded by shelves of old animation cells and production art. She pulls out a file folder labeled Wrestling Episode 2006 and lays it flat on the table. Inside are rough pencil sketches of the collapse scene. There was a debate about how long to hold the shot after he falls, she says, flipping through the pages. Normally, we'd cut quickly to the next gag. But the director wanted it to breathe, to let the silence sink in. That's rare for us. We don't usually let moments just sit there. She pauses, fingers resting on one sketch. Now I look at it and wonder if that's why it stuck with people. We gave it a weight it wasn't supposed to have. It wasn't slapstick. It was human. The scene cuts between their interviews, their words overlapping. We were just making jokes, but it